I wanted to talk to you, especially here in the John Scott Center, because I knew John Scott, so this really feels good. My dad was a professor at Xavier University, and I was a freshman when John was in the art department. And I used to go there and drop in sometimes to talk to John. And I was 18, so I would tell him everything that I knew, right? You know? So I'd tell him my observations about things. We'd talk about life, we'd talk about the world, we'd talk about justice, you know? So it feels really nice. He was a very listening man. He was a very kind man, and it really feels good to be here in his spirit. So I'm here to talk to you now about my observations. I'm a little bit older now, I'm not 18 anymore, so I have a few more observations now. And one of the things I wanted to talk to you about was what I've observed about the realities in American society right now. There seem to be people, we're living in different realities sometimes. We think different things, right? And it's become angry sometimes. There's a lot of rancor about these discoveries, about what we're doing. You've seen it on the internet. I don't need to tell you guys. You've seen it on the internet where people are angry at one another about what is going on. I'm gonna change this slide. I just remembered I was supposed to put this up here, just in case y'all forget who I am. People are angry about it. You've seen it on the internet. You've seen this rancor. You may have had these conversations about Confederate monuments and about the role of plantations. You may have had them with your family and friends, right? A lot of anger. A lot of old wounds being opened when we have these conversations. I can't heal your wounds today, right? But maybe I can open up a framework for a conversation, and that's what I'm trying to do today. Okay. So let's start with one more thing. Who am I to talk about the Constitution? I am not a lawyer. I am not a historian, actually. I'm a writer, so I'm going to take my charge from Toni Morrison. I'm a member of PEN America, and I've been a member of PEN America for many years. And she came and she talked to the members once, and I was there. And she talked about writers getting in the public conversation. All writers really want to do is go in their house and sit in a room and write. That's all we really want to do. But she said it's really important for us to get involved in the public conversation. So this is why I'm here. I hope I can give you something that's helpful, maybe, maybe not. The Constitution. So I Googled, of course, everybody has to start with Google, right? The Constitution Reconsidered. And I came up with, well, I thought I was going to come up with things about privacy, about gun violence, about race. What I came up with was this article, this book review of these essays on the Constitution Reconsidered. It was the title of a book. I said, great, my work is done. The Constitution Reconsidered. And what the reviewer said about the book was that the authors of the essays, even on the fundamental question of what a constitution constitutes, not only disagree, but find themselves on opposite ends. So I said, okay, they've been talking about dueling realities for a long time, because this book was published in 1937. Okay, it was essays from an American Historical Association meeting. So this has been going on a long time, people reconsidering the Constitution. So then I went to look for something a little bit more current, right? So I found Holly Devon's article in Anti-Gravity in May 2021. And she talked about the Louisiana Constitution. So I said, okay, well, closer to home. She says the Louisiana Constitution is 10 times as long as the American Constitution. And not only that, but it has 203 amendments. Said, okay, nobody really knows nobody knows what the Constitution does or who it serves. I mean, there are people, but there are a lot of arguments about the Constitution, so we shouldn't feel so bad about arguing about it right now, right? People have been doing this for a long time. There is so much interpretation, which brings me to my first point, wisdom. Okay, my first point is wisdom. I realize I am not wise enough to tell people what they should really think about the Constitution, but maybe I can tell you in about 45 to 50 minutes some things that we should think about. That's what I'm hoping to do. Okay, so what historical documents are being reconsidered in the light of new diverse scholarship? As I understand it, and I am not a historian, I'm not a lawyer, I'm just a writer, what people are talking about is, should we consider the Constitution in the way the founders intended it, or should we be thinking about the Constitution in what's going on right now? It's a contemporary, pliable sort of document, okay? One of the things, who knows what slide I'm on. Here's one example, the Second Amendment, right? I'm gonna go somewhere that we all have talked about, the Second Amendment. What did the founders mean when they wrote that a well-regarded militia being necessary for the security of a free state, the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed? Well, we're in Louisiana, so I know we have opinions about this. Everybody's got an opinion about this. But I think we can kind of agree that the founders didn't mean to go buy an AR-15, an AR-15 or an AK-47 off the internet if you're a teenager. I think we can kind of agree on that, right? So in that case, we are saying, yes, we kind of think about what the founders believed. We're kind of agreeing with this original interpretation of the founders, right? We're going back to that, we see. Okay, but now let's look at another article in the Constitution. And it has to be addressed when you're talking about African Americans, right? We're talking about Article 1, Section 2, which is the 3/5 clause, right? So ratified in 1788, this article said that in the case of representation and taxation, all free people, including those in bondage for fixed periods of time, would be counted as one person, exempting Indians and counting all others as 3/5 of a person. Okay, we know who the others were, right? They were the enslaved Africans. Okay, so here we are faced with these dueling realities, right? In one reality, people who were in bondage were really not considered the same as a tax-paying free person, right? That's one reality. In another reality, people are saying to themselves, who are these racists? And why should we pay any attention to them? Here are dueling realities. Should we pay attention to them, or were they not really tax-paying people? Okay, so I'm thinking that the people in this audience, right? The kind of people who wake up on a Saturday morning and come to hear a Constitution Day lecture have probably thought about the 3/5 of person article before. We've all thought about it a little bit before. And so let's agree to disagree. Let's agree to agree. Let's agree to agree, okay? Looking at the past is complicated, right? We can agree on that. All of these realities existed. All of these realities existed. There was a need for apportionment among agrarian and urbane locations, right? In other words, you could not buy yourself a bunch of more people so that you could have more representation. Okay, it was a reality. Also, there was a need for compromise to keep the Union together. Also a reality. The other reality is that the rights of free people at that time did trump the rights of people who were in bondage. Just a reality, right? So we can probably say that because of these compromises, we can sort of put to rest the idea that there was a sort of pure founder who wrote the Constitution. There were a lot of things that complicated it, right? We can all probably agree that this was not a pure document in the way that we want, because there was a lot of controversy going on and a lot of compromise going on. That said, can we also agree that, okay, there we go. Can we agree then that because 3/5 of a person seemed like a good idea because of a compromise and taxation and everything, is that just the way people thought back then? That blacks were just not equal, right? Is that the way, what do we think about that? We should then stop for a second and say, is that what people really thought back then? Okay, I'm gonna point us to Olajuwon Ikwano, who was born in 1745, who was there at the time. He wrote a memoir in 1789, and he traveled to at least 15 islands as an enslaved person, and he discussed his capture and discourse about slavery itself. And he said, for it raises the owner to a state as far above man as it depresses the slave below it. And with the presumption of human pride sets a distinction between them, immeasurable in extent and endless in duration. Yet how mistaken is the avarice even of the planters, Are slaves more useful by being thus humbled to their condition of brutes than they would be if suffered to enjoy the privileges of men? He was there back then. He had an attitude, right? He had an attitude about this 3/5 clause. He had some thoughts. Let's look at Phyllis Wheatley. Phyllis Wheatley wrote in 1773, all around this same period when we're talking about these 3/5 of men clause, right? Phyllis Wheatley wrote, "No more America, in mournful strain of wrongs," she's a poet, "and grievance unredressed, complain no longer shalt thou dread the iron chain, which wanton tyranny with lawless hand had made, and with it meant to enslave the land. Should you, my lord, while you peruse my song, wonder from whence my love of freedom sprang? Whence flow these wishes for the common good by feeling hearts alone best understood? I, young in life, by seeming cruel fate was snatched from Africa's fancied happy seat. What pangs excruciating must molest, what sorrows labored in my parents' breast. Steeled was that soul, and by no misery moved, that from a father seized his babe beloved. Such my case. And can I then pray that others may never feel the tyrannical sway?" She had thoughts, right? She had an opinion. So even though David Hume, Immanuel Kant, Thomas Jefferson thought that blacks were lesser beings, according to Henry Louis Gates in his 2002 Jeffersonian lecture, considering the attitude of new truths, I think we need to talk a little bit and think a little bit about when we talk about prevailing attitudes, because we just saw two attitudes that did not prevail what people said, right? I'd like to suggest that we even eliminate out of our vocabulary the phrase, "this is what people thought back then," because we are wise enough, unlike our 18th century predecessors, to know that enslaved people were people, right? And no lesson should be taught without the coda that not everyone felt that black humanity was of lesser value. Certainly not the people themselves, okay? So I tell you this, why am I telling you this? Because I'd say in the last year, or maybe even in the last 2 weeks, I've heard people use that phrase, you know. This is just, it's smart people, historians, smart people. They're still using the phrase that says, well, this is what people thought back then. Well, not everybody, right? Not everybody. Those are two, and I'm going to tell you some more. Okay, because it's a phrase that justifies not a prevailing attitude, it's a phrase that justifies an attitude of white superiority. So let's call it what it is. Okay, let's just call it what it is. Okay, so aren't we talking about the perspectives of a minority? That's what people will say to you, right? When you say, let's just call it, that's the way people thought back then. You know, the people who thought differently were in a minority. So let's bring it down to Louisiana, okay? According to Gibson and Young's historical census statistics on population totals by race, in the state of Louisiana from 1810 up until 1900 was 50% or more Negro, right? I've got too close to that thing. Was more than 50% Negro, 50% or more Negro. So the majority was not thinking like that, right? Okay, we're not talking about a majority. We're talking about which minority are we actually talking about. And if we look at the major cities in Louisiana from 1810 to 1900, we're talking about somewhere between 40 and 50% or more Negro population. Now, some of those places didn't have census figures early on. They didn't come in till later. But you're talking about, so let's look at the southern states, then maybe we're talking about a southern attitude, okay? Look at the southeastern states, Negro by percentage, okay? Mississippi of 1900, I'm just gonna go to 1900. There too, 40 to 50% Negro or more. 1900, Mississippi was 58% of the population. South Carolina, 58% of the population. Georgia, 46% of the population. Alabama, 45% of the population. Florida, 43% of the population. So how can we talk about a prevailing attitude when the demographics tell us that there were as many or almost as many Negroes there? And let me ask you this. Is it even factually correct? Is it even factually correct? Can we really use these words, prevailing attitude, when the demographics were statistically this close? And do you think that people survived slavery and Jim Crow by thinking that they were lesser human beings? Right? They couldn't have. Do you think that they thought they were 3/5 of a person? You don't survive by thinking you're 3/5 of a person. I think that between God and themselves, they had a different identity. They had a different identity. I have one more challenge for you. Do you think that when you had let's say a state that's 43% Negro, as you know, I'm using those old time terms, 43% Negro and 7% white, to bring it to 50%, like a 50-50, right? Do you think that not 7% of white people thought that black people were the same and equal? Do you think not 7%? Do you think that all 57% of them thought that Negroes were inferior? I might be optimistic, but I know white people, you know? And I think I know 7% who think that people are equal, that know in their heart that given the same opportunities as somebody else, they would be equal, that things would be equal. So we're talking about at least 50-50%. So we cannot continue to use this term, prevailing attitude, or that's what people thought back then, without giving it some serious consideration. Okay, let's be factually correct. I'm gonna put in this joke. I think I know white people, there are 7% of white people not even white. Okay, so I'm in Louisiana. I know y'all would get that. You know? So I dare say that they thought they were equal. Okay, okay. Let's consider this old truth, and let's call it what it was. It was supremacy, an attitude of supremacy, an attitude of superiority that has sort of gone into our scholarship, right? Okay. So when I'm talking about new truths, I'm talking about, those are old facts. That's 1810 census and stuff. That's old. I'm talking about a new attitude of reconsideration. Let's look at this old stuff and look at it with a new brain, right? Let's look at it with a new brain. I'm talking about a mindset of reconsideration. So words like prevailing thought or prevailing attitude is one example of it. And so I am giving you some context for why people are saying the things that are causing the ruckus. They're coming at this with a different mindset. That you've got scholars who are saying, I'm not going to go back to that old mindset to say this was a prevailing attitude. I know differently. I've seen facts, and the facts are telling me something different. Okay? So where do we find facts and documents to reconsider in a new light? We look at primary documents. They are in the archives. So I'm guessing I'm here with a nicely educated audience, but for new researchers in this audience. The archives are places where some of our oldest documents are held, right? They're difficult to find and they're difficult to access. This is especially true for people who are trying to find information that never has been analyzed before, right? These are new scholarship. Because the enslaved were not considered people, right? Where do you look? I bet you everybody in here can tell me. You look in the property records, right? That's where you have to go. When you go into the archives, you look into property records. If you look into people in the property records, you look into accounting ledgers, you look at family meetings for inheritance, you match ages and colors, you know, skin colors to find people, right? So what primary documents should be looked at? These primary documents of property records, notarial archives, places like that. Financial records that are global, national, that go from the documents of banks to the price of children, okay? When we look at these property records, these primary documents, and try to trace them, we should be tracing lives. We should be tracing lives. The Purchased Lives exhibition, I think Aaron's around here somewhere. So the Purchased Lives exhibition was a nice way to start that process, right? I looked at ships and places and how many people came in. That was nice. This kind of diversity of thought should compel those who work in the archives now, those of you who not only know about the archives, but work in the archives. I want you to start thinking and operating differently, okay? What do I want y'all to do? You know I'm a mama, so I'm telling y'all what to do, okay? We need to put some metadata in those archives, in those property records, that consider that they are people in these records, that they are not just financial and property records, but John Smith is in this record. Mary Jones is in this record, right? Okay, that's going to take a lot more work. It's going to take a different kind of work and a different kind of mindset. It's a lot of work to do that, right? But shouldn't we be doing this in the light of new scholarship and reconsideration of people and not as property? You know, we're in the 21st century. We've got all of this technology. You know, we can do this, okay? So I'm going to tell you that sometimes, on another note, sometimes when you go to an archives, like a person like me, to look at things, new scholars, you have with an attitude of diversity, you are spurned, okay? I began working on Economy Hall in 1997, and I had an address, and I wanted a scholar to help me in the archives to find an address in the French Quarter, and she said, no, Black people don't live in the French Quarter. They didn't even live in, 1997 I'm talking about, right? No, they didn't live in the French Quarter. They lived in the Faubourg Marigny. But I said, but I got an address right here. Can you just help me find the address? No, she wasn't interested, okay? Sometimes old truths are just plain wrong, okay? In Economy Hall, I'm gonna read to you from the Picayune's Guide to New Orleans. Those of you who have read the book, bear with me. I explained in 1904, the Picayune's Guide to New Orleans explained hybrid Louisiana. It said everything that is good in New Orleans is Creole. The booklet explained that the natural environment of Louisiana had created strains of produce and livestock that the local buyers and sellers prized, and they identified these varieties by the term Creole. Y'all know Creole tomatoes, right? The guide went on, however, to exclude people of mixed race. One hears too, I'm quoting here, the term Creole Negroes, but it must be remembered always that this is a fine distinction, meaning blacks and colored people that are Louisiana bred and born and French speaking, as distinguished from the Negroes of other states. Creole means white, okay? Creole means white. So I'm here, I'm here, I exist. I've always wondered, you know, that why when the French and the Spanish came and they had their first generations in Louisiana, they're called Creoles, right? But when the Igbo and the Fon marry in Louisiana, why aren't they Creole? Right? There may be Creole Negroes if you go here, right? Even today, there'll be Creole Negroes. They're not, like you've got two different tribes from two different places, nations. France and Spain are two different nations, but we call their generations Creoles, but we're not calling people from different tribes from Africa Creoles, right? Wondering why. Think about it a little bit, okay? Sometimes approaching the archives with an attitude with diversity is simply a little frustrating. I want to tell you, and I'm not going to spend my time complaining because y'all hear enough complaints. But people tell you, no one has ever, right? No one has ever, when you go there, you say, meaning no one has ever looked this up, thought this. It also means that I won't help you, even if it's my job, because I'm too lazy, or I don't like what you're looking for, okay? No one has ever, all right? Whenever I hear that phrase, I know I'm on to something. I say, maybe I've found something new, or maybe I've found something that's scary to this person. My teeth, I start salivating. Okay, all right, okay. So let's see, did I go to the next one? So I'm a journalist. I started out as a journalist. I went to BU and graduated from BU, right, as in journalism. Would journalists believe that when everybody is looking one way, you look the other way? Okay, you look the other way. Now, historians don't think like that. They don't look like that. That's not the thing to do, right? A historian has to base everything on previous scholarship. You have to say, this is previous scholarship, you can't look away from it. So, but to find new truths means to counter prevailing ideas in a certain way. So for an African-American researcher, looking at prevailing scholarship is not always that good. You can't have that much faith in it, right? Now, so it's not that I'm throwing it out. I don't dismiss prevailing scholarship. I'm just saying it's difficult and it's a new mindset, right, to go at it in a different way. So I'm thinking I was invited here to talk because I wrote Economy Hall. You know, if I was sitting in the 7th Ward, I wouldn't have invited me. So I'm here to talk. So I just want to show you that I did look at prevailing scholarship from 1997 when I started. This is a list of the people that I was looking at in 1997, right? Charles Rusev, Marcus Christian, Mary Berry, David Rankin, Eric Foner, Rudolph Desdune, Joseph Loxton, Gwendolyn Midlow Hall, Maud Cuny Hare, Donald Everett, Carter Woodson, James Monroe Trotter, for research into the origins of free people of color. I read the wonderful Kimberly Hanger. For culture and society, I looked at Mary Gaiman and Lester Sullivan. For politics, Karen Cosey Bell. And for neighborhoods, like the New Orleans Architecture Series, you had to read the New Orleans Architecture Series about 5 times, right? And I have about 50 pages of footnotes, right? For what kind of documents, primary documents am I looking at? From the spiritualist registers, the historical census, the L'Union, the New Orleans Tribune, the Picayune's Guide to New Orleans, Economy Society Minutes, interviews, property records, birth and death certificates. What else I got up there? A German newspaper that I saw, Economy Hall, popped up in the German newspaper. Letters and archives. I have letters from racists, Samuel Cartwright, who was a scientific racist. Letters from other people who wrote to the Economy Hall to get their people buried, and 19th century pamphlets and plantation documents. And so yeah, you have to go back to your previous scholarship to get to new scholarship, right? But you can't believe it all. You just can't believe it all. I continue to do research. The work that's helping me right now, I look at the LSU's Free People of Color website, their digital documents. I found my family in the digital documents. I think I was telling this gentleman over there, my ancestors, the LaSalles. The Historic New Orleans collection now has this wonderful interactive table of maps where free people of color own property, right? So I thumbed my nose at the woman who said they didn't live there. Other people I'm looking at, just to let y'all know, Jessica Marie Johnson's doing some incredible work. I can't even wrap my mind around all the stuff she's doing. Erin might be familiar with some of her work, but she's doing some great data collection. And what I'm telling you is we're really not, when you're looking at history, you're really not looking at different documents. You're just coming to it with a different mind, right? You come into a mind of humanity and not property. It's a different mindset. Another person who's doing some interesting stuff is Abram X. Kendi, right? He's doing data tracking at my alma mater, I must say, He's doing racial data tracking, and he's right now, they just started it out, but right now he's doing things about health and data, right? Where places, are, in terms of race, how much does race affect your health care, right? Contemporary, interesting stuff. Another person is Darrell Williams with enslaved.org. There's another place that does ships and stuff, but he's got like an all-around nice thing that's sort of built on the work of Gwendolyn Midlow Hall. So you can pop in, those of you who do research, you can pop in the name of an enslaved person, you can pop in the name of an owner, you can pop in like Louisiana, and it'll bring up all sorts of things. There's more than 1 million documents that are in that website. It's great stuff. Other academics and independent researchers that I'm trying to follow, and I only have so much space up here now, but I'm trying to follow Lakeisha Mitchell-Simmons, who did Crescent City Girls, Darrell Barthay Jr., who writes about Creoles, Brian Mitchell, who y'all must know who wrote Monumental, Clint Bruce, who did those wonderful translations of radical poetry, Black radical poetry, Mark Rudnay, who just knows all kinds of stuff, but he really knows about the Tribune, and he's gone right there to the primary documents. And Bailey Dewey, who you haven't heard of, but I think you're going to hear of her, because she's a brilliant young woman who's getting her PhD, and she knows all the language of the new scholarship. She's just wonderful. Another group, and I don't turn that slide yet. Another group that I am reading about, I'm subscribed to the African American Intellectual History Society. And in their newsletter, Black Perspectives, recently, Hetty Williams wrote an essay called Black Historians, Race and Historical Profession. It was an answer to a previous column that was written by President of the American Historical Association, or a society, I'm not sure. Which she said, "It is not presentist to note that racial slavery has had an indelible and residual impact on the lives of African Americans down to contemporary times. Regardless of how today's debates about history continue to divide academia, practitioners of Black history continue to work hard to educate the public about the centrality of the story to the tapestry of America and world history. Okay? Right. So why are people so upset? Why is this open old wounds if we're just looking at the facts of what happened, right? But why is this opening old wounds? I have a few theories, so I'm gonna give you some of my theories. But here are some of the questions that you've probably heard. Why are we still talking about race, Lord? Right? Everybody wants to know, why are we still talking about slavery? Right? Why are we still focused? My husband asked me, why are we still studying slavery? I think Hetty answered that a little bit. It had to do with the global history. We have to look at global history, not only our own history. We have to look at global history and see the part that these 400,000 people leaving and all this shipping and all this trade, how it changed the world, right? I'm going to read you something else that probably makes people a little crazy sometimes. Before the establishment, this quotes, before the abolishment of the international slave trade, 400 enslaved Africans would be sold into America. Those individuals and their descendants transformed the lands to which they had been brought into some of the most successful colonies in the British Empire. They taught the colonists to grow rice. They grew and picked the cotton that at the height of slavery was the nation's most valuable commodity. They accounted for half of all American exports and 66% of the world's supply. They laid the foundations for the White House and the Capitol, even placing with their unfree hands the Statue of Freedom atop the Capitol dome. They lugged the heavy wooden tracks of the railroads that crisscrossed the South and that helped take the cotton they picked into the northern textile mills, fueling the Industrial Revolution. Profits from Black people's stolen labor helped the young nation pay off its war debts and finance some of our most prestigious universities. It was the relentless buying and selling, insuring and financing of their bodies and the products of their labor that made Wall Street a thriving banking, insurance, and trading sector, and New York City the financial capital of the world. This is the kind of new truth, new perspective that seems to be causing a ruckus, to take those kinds of statements. And of course, I'm quoting Nicole Hannah Jones, who has just made everybody lose their minds, right? Okay, but is she wrong about that? Facts are facts, right? If you look at the facts and you look at them as human beings, you have to think about it a little bit differently. It's 2021, you gotta think about it a little bit different. So I'm not gonna repeat all the arguments. You know the arguments. People don't wanna call slaves captives. But let me ask you this, just put yourself in this position. You have children or you have brothers and sisters. If your child, somebody took your child and put your child on a boat and sent them somewhere and they were working all the time, right? You never saw them again. Would you like that person? You wouldn't like that person. Would you want to build a monument to the person who stole your child? Right? Would you, I mean really, in your own life? Would you, to somebody who raped your child, let's build a monument, this guy rapes my kid. You know, it's a little absurd when you think about it in your own personal terms. So let me ask you to bring your humanity. When you read history, bring your own humanity to it. Put yourself in the shoes of these people, okay? Bring your humanity to it. I don't want to argue about reparations and all like that. Just put your humanity into it. What we know is racism has been incorporated into our institutions, in our systems, and our brains, right? Into our brains. Because we don't put ourselves in, it's not my child. I'll tell you what, this is an aside. How long am I talking? I was reading these documents and I saw the names of my children when I was reading sales documents. I saw the names of my children. And that stopped me for about 2 months. I said, you know, let me personalize this stuff. Okay, so that's what I want y'all to do. Okay, facts. Questions of old truths and neither new truths, okay? So for most of my life, I heard about 3 castes of people: the enslaved, the whites, the free people of color, right? 3 castes of people. And they said, oh, the free people of color, they were pretty free, right? Okay, yeah, well, relative to what? Relative to what? I grew up in the 1950s and 60s, and I grew up in segregation, and I didn't feel that free, and I was 100 years later, So they weren't that free, no matter how much we want to say that. Not only that, when I looked at the statistics, when they were broken up into these three castes, they didn't make a lot of sense to me. When people talked about Creole New Orleans and how it was built, I said, Black people had a lot of impact on this, right? So I looked at the statistics in a different way. What if I looked at the people who were free and the people who were not really free? People who are oppressed, because there's not partial freedom. You know, I mean, you know, you can partially go out this door, right? You either go out the door or you don't go out the door, right? So look at it in terms of the people who are oppressed and the people who are free. The numbers come out a little bit differently. It's a different mindset. The numbers come out differently. You see that people of color, both free and enslaved, built New Orleans for that early years, its formative years. They had a lot to do about that. Why am I giving you the statistic? I'm telling you this because we do not have comparable books written about the majority of the people who were in New Orleans. We have lots of history books, but the majority of the people were people of color. And we do not have the majority of our histories written about people of color, right? We have it coming from a very narrow point of view. So when I read these statistics, right, never made sense. Because in New Orleans, we had 45% free people approximately for about 3 to 4 decades. And the rest of the country had 14% of free people of color. So there was a lot of things that went on with free people of color in New Orleans that are not written about, okay? Or with people of color in general. The thing about racism in our brains is that it suspends our logic, right? We have the evidence is there, but we don't look at it in that way. We don't come to logical conclusions. We've got, like I showed you, Louisiana was more than half Black, but we don't have our books. Our history books are not more than half Black or talking about more than half Black people. It suspends logic, right? We write about that very narrow little group of people. Anyway, why am I still talking? I think I'm supposed to go to the next slide. Okay, yeah. Why am I talking? Why are we still, like my husband said, why are we still talking about slavery? Why are we still talking about slavery? Because when I look at these primary documents, and like this pamphlet called The South Vindicated from Treason and Fanaticism of the Northern Abolitionists, which was written in 1836, the same year that the Economy Society formed, right? It says, in part, the situation of the slave is in every particular incompatible with the cultivation of the mind. It would not only be unfit for his station in life, but prepare him for insurrection, but it would be found wholly impracticable to the performance of the duties of a laborer. So that means wholly impracticable. Cultivation of the mind doesn't. Now, as a writer, in a public conversation with you guys, I cannot read that statement from that primary document in 1836 without thinking that no public high school in New Orleans existed for 90,000 Negroes until 1917. Okay? I can't separate that document from that knowledge. Nor can I separate that knowledge, that document, from the knowledge that the only public high school for Blacks in New Orleans, there was only one public high school for Blacks in New Orleans from 1917 to 1942, when the Negro population reached almost 150,000. Okay? I can't separate that, the cultivation of the mind, it's not for them, with these facts that I know. And I'm going to take you one more place. I cannot disconnect that statement by an advocate for slavery with the fact that we don't have any decent public school system for children today, right? Or that, according to Martha Jewson in the June 7, 2022 issue of The Lens, that the teachers in New Orleans are 4 times likely to be uncertified as in other places in Louisiana. And the lack of certified teachers is most common in areas with the highest percentage of economically disadvantaged students. It seems to me that there's a thought line that runs right through there, that runs from 1836 to this present day, okay? So that's why we're talking about slavery in 2021. That's why we're talking about it. Okay, subject of this talk. Documents are being reconsidered in the light of new diverse scholarship, yes. Primary documents relating to Louisiana's African descendants are under scrutiny, yes. Must new perspectives necessarily ignite dueling realities? Well, if you don't want to deal with reality, no. Oh, okay. You can avoid realities. You can try to ban scrutiny of these documents and this mentality. According to PEN America, last year during a 9-month period, there were more than 1,500 books banned in the United States, mostly young adult books, right? The most objectionable bans, in my opinion, although all of them are objectionable, allow for the erasure of history or the distortion of history because no one wants to be upset. Nobody wants to feel bad. The Diary of Anne Frank has recently been banned. Mouse has been banned. To Kill a Mockingbird has been banned. When the classroom is really the best place to discuss difficult subjects, right? These dueling, the classroom is the best place to talk about this. But yes, there was a Holocaust, right? Yes, there was prejudice when the time To Kill a Mockingbird was written, right? These are the realities. You can avoid it, you can try to avoid it, but not reading it, not knowing about it. And that'll avoid dueling realities, but you're not going to be really in reality, will you? The answer is yes. If you can live with reality, you want to live with reality, right? We can consider the humanity of people and think about the realities with new ideas and new vocabularies. We can talk, instead of about slaves, we can say enslaved people, right? Instead of saying plantations, forced labor camps. Might be a stretch for some people, but think of it, it was forced labor, right? We can realize that plantations were nothing nice, right? They were not nice. And I know our economy thrives on this beauty and stuff, but they were not nice. If you go there, you got to feel that spirit, right? Whenever we learn something, our new knowledge overrides our old knowledge, right? Whether we find out that our favorite founding father was a cruel slave owner, or whether we find out that the founding father that we really hated actually was good on some levels, right? It's going to trip our little minds up a little bit, okay? So it's an identity crisis. We have to ask ourselves, we wind up asking ourselves, what kind of nation is this? What kind of state is this? What kind of city do I live in if we know that it was based on all this torture and kidnapping? And what kind of person am I who loves it? Right? I love New Orleans. Who am I? Let's try to be people who can live with individual contradictions. Let's be people who can live with historical nuance, right? Let's be people who can live with dueling realities and accept reality and still be okay. We can be okay. We know these things existed, right? That's the wisdom to know the difference, right? We have biographies of founders that sugarcoat the way this country was created. Some people want to ban books. The Constitution's First Amendment allows for the freedom to read and to write and to assemble. In order to educate a population, we need to read everything we can, even when it goes against our beliefs. We need to understand the arguments of others who have the wisdom to refine our own beliefs, right? This can only happen if writers can write freely and learners can read, and the freedom that we have comes from the Constitution. The Constitution, I think I'll keep it, okay? Stephen Ambrose, I'm gonna read you a couple of more things and I'm gonna wrap up, okay? Stephen E. Ambrose, in To America, Personal Reflections of a Historian, quoted Theodore Roosevelt to say about the men of color in the Battle of New Orleans that, quote, "One band had in its formation something that was curiously pathetic. It was composed of free men of color who gathered to defend the land which kept the men of their race in slavery." Okay? Now, I think that a different kind of writer with a different kind of mindset would have written that differently, okay? That phrase, curiously pathetic. Let's look at what this Haitian writer, Saint-Remy, Joseph Saint-Remy, wrote about the fighters in Saint-Domingue who came to fight for the American Revolution. André Rigaud, Jean-Baptiste Chavannes, and Jean-Baptiste Belly. He said, "It is thus that the colored population of Saint-Domingue went to the American continent to battle for the liberation of a people who nevertheless kept no account of this generous devotion, who, the danger over, cruelly forgot that the African blood mingled with their own to bring forth the liberty which they deny to our race. So, which perspective? Which perspective? Were these fighters for blacks who were fighting for liberty, were they curiously pathetic or were they generous? Okay, these are two different perspectives, right? Okay, when you read historical documents, let me give you a little advice, if I may. Make sure that you don't take into consideration only the perspective of the powerful. Think about who they're writing about. Walk in people's shoes. Think about how they felt and bring your humanity to their humanity. Regarding the Constitution's 3/5 article, let me swing back over there. Frederick Douglass supported the document, saying that the document itself was good, but governments had allowed slaveholders to interpret it. He said, they reserve common law usage and presume the Negro a slave unless he can prove himself free. I, on the other hand, presume him free unless he is proven otherwise. Let's look at the objects for which the Constitution was framed and adopted and see if slavery is one of them. Here are the objects as set forth by itself. We, the people of the United States, in order to form a more perfect union, establish justice, ensure domestic tranquility, provide for the common defense, promote the general welfare, and secure the blessings of liberty to ourselves and our posterity, do ordain to establish this Constitution of the United States of America. It's language, he says. We, the people, he says. It's not we, the white people, not even we, the citizens, not we the horses, the sheep, the swine, the wheelbarrows, but we the people, we the human inhabitants. And if Negroes are people, they are included in the benefits of the Constitution, which was ordained and established. Governments are wicked, but not the Constitution. For instance, he says, the American government and the American Constitution are spoken of in a manner that is one identical with the other, when the truth is they are distinct in character as a ship and a compass. The one may point right and the other steer wrong. A chart is one thing, the vessel is another. The Constitution may be right, the government is wrong. If the government has been governed by men sordid and with wicked passions, it does not follow that the Constitution is sordid and wicked. So, I started off with a reference to the serenity prayer. God grant me the serenity to accept things I cannot change, courage to change things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. And I'm going to end with a story about King Solomon. Y'all know this story. King Solomon, two women were fighting over a baby, right? And one says, this is my baby, the other one says, that's my baby. And the one and one says, let's just kill the baby, we'll get this over with. And we'll shut this down. It's not, I don't care, I don't have a baby, nobody's gonna have a baby, right? And King Solomon and the other woman said, no, let the baby live. King Solomon gave the baby to her. So what I'm advising to you is not to cut history in two like that. Let's try to keep this democracy going, right? Don't cut it in two. They are dueling realities, but we don't have to kill it just to keep it, right? Let's consider this new diverse scholarship with logic and with kindness, and you will find the wisdom to understand the nation and yourself, and maybe you'll even nourish it, your new understanding, until it grows up and works tirelessly for justice. Okay, thank you.